Dr. Ghalibaf, his office put out a statement today saying that they distorted what he said, and they put out the full uh, clip, and they said that what these Persian media outlets abroad that are funded by the United States, the Israelis, the Saudis, and the Europeans, they put out this clip where they put the bits. I didn't watch the that particular clip, but I did see the full clip, and it is very misleading. He did not say that he was not implying that we have to uh, end the war now and to accept whatever conditions are available. Dr. Pezeshkian, he is a person who always, um, I don't know what the word for it in English would be, but he's sort of like, I don't want to say a loose cannon, but he'll say things. He speaks off the cuff a lot, and he says this sort of thing a lot. He's been saying this for months. Now, I believe that Dr. Pezeshkian means the MOU, and that if we can get it, the United States to accept the MOU today, then and to carry out its obligations within the framework of the MOU, then that is fine. And I think there's a more or less a consensus on that. I don't think everyone thinks that's enough, but for Iran, the MOU is the deal. There is no other deal. And since Trump has already um, betrayed Iran at the negotiating table on multiple occasions. Last year, we had the 12-day war. Before the war, we were carrying out negotiations, and then it turned out that that was just uh, for cover. The true intentions were to attack Iran, so the negotiations were all fake. Then the negotiations before this war, roughly 6 months ago, took place. That turned out to be fake. The Omani foreign minister, the country that Trump now says he's going to bomb to SHIT. He went to the United States, said a significant progress had been made, but it was clear that the Americans were not seeking uh, a deal or progress. They were hell bent on attacking Iran because that's what Netanyahu wanted. And then, of course, we had the ceasefire agreement after 40 days of fighting. And a part of that ceasefire deal was an end to the slaughter in Lebanon. And then Netanyahu, in order to wreck the ceasefire, he carpet bombed Lebanon. You recall this. And then Trump sided with him, even though it was a part of the deal that the Israeli regime would not be allowed to do so. And that led to siege warfare. Trump then imposed a siege on Iran, which lasted for over 2 months until we got the MOU. The point being that negotiating with Trump is virtually impossible because ultimately, when we did get the MOU, he put his signature on it. Literally, he signed the text. And it was clear from day one that he was not serious about implementation. And we went through this together before. He violated Article 1 on Lebanon and the other fronts. He violated all the other articles. He refused to hand over Iran's stolen assets. He continued to threaten Iranian people and the Iranian leadership, a violation of the deal. He expanded the sanctions regime during that period, another violation. He removed the sanctions on Iran's oil exports, then reversed it after a few days, another violation. And the list goes on until he finally went and set up his own corridor, excuse me, set up his own corridor in the Strait of Hormuz, which was a violation of Article 5, which basically said that Iran will manage the Strait of Hormuz and normalize trade. So, what is Iran to negotiate right now? Who does Iran negotiate with? So right now, the Iranians are saying if we're going to have a peace, the United States has to carry out its obligations. And Iran has been more clear about U.S. obligations because in the MOU, Iran said Lebanon and other fronts, the wars have to come to an end. And now Iran has been more specific. The Supreme National Security Council and its chair have said Gaza has to end, and the wars in Yemen and Palestine in general, and Iraq have to come to an end. Not crazy demands, stop killing kids, but that's something that's uh, not
Um,
very
so,
appetizing for the Trump regime.
so, Professor, you said the MOU is the deal, but the MOU is very vague and brief. For example, the MOU does not mention the fees of the Strait of Hormuz and what that fee would be and how the structure would be and how the Strait of Hormuz would look like. So these are all things being negotiated. So I think the disagreements
But
are the
that's not
main
between
disagreement.
Iran and the United States. Yeah, but that's not between Iran. That's not a part of an Iran-U.S. arrangement. We don't negotiate our affairs with Oman with the United States. So the MOU was about normalizing trade through the Strait of Hormuz. That would take 2 months. The first month it would the number of ships would rise gradually, and in month two it would be a normal like before. But the management of the Strait of Hormuz is something that will happen after negotiations between Iran and Oman, and that is actually written in Article 5.
Correct. But what I mean is that I understand what you're saying. There's no details of what happens to the Strait of Hormuz because that's completely irrelevant to the United States. Now, this is whether it should be relevant, shouldn't be relevant, the legal implications, etc. Obviously, the U.S. has no territory there, unless you want to believe Trump. The U.S. owns the Strait of Hormuz; it's now American territory, but the U.S. has no territorial waters there. So, from a legal perspective, it has no say on what happens to the Strait of Hormuz. Um, but obviously, this is not the reality we have right now. And there are discussions. I think the main disagreement is on the Strait of Hormuz. So I think the question would be is what is more likely? So let's say the Iranians want to charge a 3% fee, just making up a number for all ships that go through. Would you say it's more likely the Iranians, not because of the economic blockade, let's just say it directly, because of the economic blockade by the United States, the economic sanctions, are they more likely to concede, go from 3% to 1%? They still get a fee, they still make a lot of money, but it's lower than what they were initially demanding? Or they're more likely to stick to 3% and escalate into kinetic action, strike the US in order to break the blockade?
I think the problems between Iran and the United States go far beyond the Strait of Hormuz. The issue is that the Israeli regime is committing genocide in Gaza. It's occupying southern Lebanon. As we speak, it's bombing Lebanon as we speak. And Lebanon is killing people every day, women and children. And for Iran, these have to come to an end. In other words, without these happening, there will be no agreement with the United States. The Strait of Hormuz will not be open. So as long as the genocide, you see, Mario, the difference between Iran and Western governments is that they think, these elites think that since they have no real principles and they have no real values, then no one has values and principles. And obviously, these mad mullahs, these evil ayatollahs, they obviously don't have principles. So it's all cynical to them. But the Iranians are saying, and they're very clear about this, until the occupation of Lebanon comes to an end, and the killing comes to an end, and until, more importantly, the genocide in Gaza comes to an end, we will not have a deal, and we will not open the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the Strait of Hormuz is not fully closed for a host of reasons. Some ships linked to friends of Iran, they go through. Some ships linked to countries on the other side of the Persian Gulf, they allow them to go through. They have some deals. The Iranians and the Emirates have their own deals. The Iranians and Qatar have their own deals. That's how it works right now. So some ships go through, but the Strait of Hormuz will not be normalized until the genocide in Gaza comes to an end. So these are part of it. So it's not as if the Americans are saying, okay, we're going to force the Israeli regime to stop killing kids, and we're going to hand over uh, your assets. And no, it has all of these things have to happen. That is the MOU. That's what Trump signed on to, and then we will have normalization. So it's not so the issue is not whether Iran is going to get 3% or 1%. And if whatever it gets, it's going to be between Iran and Oman, and it's subject to change. It could go from 3 to 5 next year. It could go from 5 to 2 next year. That is between these two countries. But the root of the problem is the wars and the Americans, and now they want to start something with Turkey, possibly, which have no doubt that if there's even though Erdogan uh, never helped Palestine or Gaza or Lebanon or Iran, but if the Israeli regime attacks Turkey, Iran will go to the aid of Turkey. So, but in any case, the wars have to go to an end. The wars have to come to an end, and this is just one small piece of the puzzle.
Is there a scenario where the Iranians escalate? So if the blockade continues, and there's a big debate right now on who blinks first, because this is having pretty significant impact on the American economy. We're seeing bond yields, etc., in the US and Europe, inflation, economic slowdown. And also it's having an impact, as Galibaf and Pezeshkian just said, it's having an impact in Iran. So everyone's debating on who's going to blink first, who's suffering more, who can sustain this for longer. Is there a level where if it reaches that level from a pain threshold to the Iranian people, that the Iranians decide to strike the Americans first in order to break the deadlock?
That's quite possible. Or that the Iranians would start striking the proxies of the United States in the region. All of that is possible. Remember, we don't have a ceasefire. We're at war. And the United States is waging siege warfare. And the countries in the region are hosting US forces, US assets, and they assisted the United States in attacking Iran. So when there's no ceasefire, then whenever you decide to fire at your enemy, you're not initiating conflict. So, yes, there's a possibility that Iran will start punishing the United States, taking out its assets in the region, taking out its proxies in the region. In fact, in Dr. Qadibaf's tweet today, if you can find it,
I have it, yeah.
he says that countries in the region have approached Iran to say that we need to have some sort of security arrangement. And that the only way forward is just to get rid of the Americans, because the Americans and the Israelis don't care about these countries. They only care about Israelis. And they sacrifice these countries. And in that tweet, he said something like, these countries, meaning the countries in the Persian Gulf, they recognize that their fate was, their fate was at stake. Their regimes were at stake. For a while, it seemed to them that they could lose everything. That is the key point. If the United States intensifies its warfare against Iran, then these countries that have cooperated with the United States, that cooperate with the United States, that assist the United States in its warfare against Iran, they're not out of the woods.
Yeah, I've got the post here by Galibaf. It's an interesting post because it's the timing of it is interesting, considering the Mecca agreement, the negotiations that are going on, the agreement between Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi, Egypt being open to join. Bangladesh today said that they could join. Syria yesterday said they could join. That's a middle finger to Israel there. It's a pretty significant developments after the strike on Syria by Israel. So this is Galibaf saying, we've received numerous messages from neighboring countries about shaping new security arrangements and economic cooperation in the region. The US put security of every single one of its allies at such risk through bullying and pure disregard for their interests for the sake of Israel that they briefly saw their entire existence on the line. A homegrown independent order is what will actually deliver peace and security. I know I have another thing I want to ask you about, and I know this is you speaking, this is your personal opinion, speaking on the behalf of the government. You don't have access to any classified information. I'm very confident that the Iranians fired the missiles at the UAE. I'm not surprised. During negotiations, these things happen. One thing I've learned, especially from this war, but doing what I do over the last few years, and I'm sure you can relate to this, is 80% of what's out there is either fluff or just fabricated. Usually, what matters the most, what happens behind the scenes, and we don't know about it. So, do you know why? What is the disagreement between the Emiratis and the Iranians for the missiles to be fired at the Emirates a few days ago? I'm just really fascinated to know
Iran,
why. I haven't found
yeah,
out yet.
Iran did not fire 2 missiles at the Emirates, and Iranian missiles don't fall into the sea. I think by now, you and I and others know that if Iran fires a missile, it'll hit the target. It will not
No, but they
fall
were
into the sea.
intercepted. They haven't, from what I understand, they haven't fallen into the sea. They were intercepted. I
No,
know one was.
there were no. Iran fired 2 anti-ship missiles, but they did not fire any missiles, which they continue to do. No, the Emiratis had their own issue, but for now, the Emiratis have not acted on their threats. But in any case, the Emirates is far less important for Iran now than it was 6, 7 months ago, because the Americans keep talking about alternative routes, or for oil going through to the Red Sea or the Mediterranean. I mean, that's fine. It'll take years to develop them, but at the end of the day, the oil fields and the gas fields are here. You can't move them to the Red Sea or to the Mediterranean or somewhere else. So if these countries in future, assuming that they survive, they help in engaging war, help in the United States engaging war with Iran, then Iran will be able to strike them, and those uh, corridors for oil and gas, they'll be useless. But what has happened actually is that Iran's corridors are being swiftly uh, developed through Central Asia, through Afghanistan, through Pakistan, through the Caspian Sea, and through the Caucasus. So, and Iran is not like Saudi Arabia or the Emirates or Bahrain or Qatar or Kuwait. It has a diverse economy. Oil and energy is a part of the economy, but it has exports and imports that go through these corridors. So the more these corridors are developed, uh, the less dependent Iran is on ports in the Persian Gulf region. But no, Iran didn't fire ground to ground missiles at the Emirates. If they had, they would have struck their targets.
So many missiles were intercepted. The majority of missiles during the war were intercepted. So there is a possibility that missiles were fired. I know you don't believe it. Missiles were fired at the UAE. This is me speculating. I think it's just fascinating to be part of those negotiations and
You know,
really
it's
hear what's
it's
happening, the disagreements.
Mario, when they say, it's sort of like Ukraine, when they say all the missiles were, because constantly the Emiratis and the Kuwaitis were saying all the missiles were intercepted, and then we would the next day see satellite photos of the damage. So they can't have it both ways. They can't complain about the damage and at the same time say that everything was intercepted.
No, I never
The
said everything.
the
I said some were
if
intercepted.
Iran
I never said
wanted
everything.
if Iran wanted to strike the Emirates and hurt the Emirates, Iran would have hurt the Emirates. I
Yeah.
mean,
No, I don't
have
think
no doubt
I don't
about
think they wanted. No, but I don't think they wanted to hurt the Emirates. I think that was more of a warning. What I'm fascinated by, and obviously it could be cruise missiles to ships, which is what the Iranians said, and that was my first guess because that's what happened a few weeks ago. But for me, and the reason I'm so fascinated by it is just trying to understand what's happening behind the scenes. We saw the reports of Emirati planes, private planes, going to Iran for an hour or two and coming back. And I've been speculating for a while that the Emiratis would send money, would unfreeze assets for the Iranians. But it's just fascinating to know what's happening behind the scenes. I don't think the intention was to cause damage in the UAE. I don't think it's that significant of a development. Personally, I see these things as just disagreements that are happening behind the scenes. But pure speculation. I was just interested to see if you had any insight into this.
Well, the
Um,
Iranians do fire missiles at ships, but the reason why the differences that Iran has with the Emirates is that the Emirates uh, it it assisted the United States in attacking Iran. As we speak, the U.S. has assets in the Emirates. As we speak, the United States is prepared for a major strike against Iran. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but as we speak, if the United States within the next, let's say, I don't know. I can't. I'm just saying this. I'm just making this up. If the United States wanted to carry out a major assault on Iran in, let's say, 2, 3 days, it has all the forces there to do it. They're not ready to carry out a major operation, let's say tonight. They have to do things and move things around. But all the assets that it brought to the region in these countries, in Jordan, and of course Palestine, they continue to exist. They move things around. Some of their forces are now in hotels or in buildings that they've rented or have been given to them for free because the Emirates and Qatar and Saudi Arabia pay for the U.S. presence in their country. It's not as if they just give the land; they pay for the activities that the Americans carry out in their countries. So these countries are basically cooperating with the United States, which is at war with Iran, which is engaged in war in the country. So the grievances are many, and and this is not the first war. These countries assisted Saddam Hussein alongside the Americans and the Europeans to carry out his war of aggression against Iran. Last year in the 12-day war, they all participated because when the Israeli regime would strike Iran, their jets would have to be refueled. Those planes that refueled the jets flew from US bases in the Persian Gulf region. So these countries were assisting the Israeli regime. And those radar installations that the Americans have throughout the Persian Gulf region, all of them were being used to help the Israelis during the 12-day war. And of course, during the 40-day war until each and every one of them were destroyed, they were being used against Iran. So these countries effectively waged war on Iran 3 times in 1980, last year, and this year. And yet they consider Iran to be the threat. But Iran has never initiated war against any country in the last 47 years.
there's another thing I've been thinking about as well recently. My analysis, if you remember, is that the Iranians, they're very pragmatic, very calculated in um, in the ongoing negotiations. Look how far they've progressed. And one of the calculations I think they've made is that they would not risk war with the US and Israel to force Israel to pull out of Lebanese territory, even though they say they would. My position is that they would risk war to defend Hezbollah. I think this is a red line for them. So if the Israelis keep striking Hezbollah and causing significant damage, more than just the hill, the Ali Tahir hill, the Iranians could get involved. But I don't think the Iranians would militarily force Israel to pull out of South Lebanon, despite what the MOU says. Um, what's your position on that point?
Well, if you recall, the reason why the MOU was signed was because Iran said that if Netanyahu strikes Beirut again or Dahia again, then Iran will strike Israel. And he did after a few days. And the Iranians were about to carry out missile strikes on the Israeli regime. And again, the Israelis, like the Emiratis and the Kuwaitis, they intercept everything. But later on, it turns out that the damage was enormous. But when the Iranians were about to launch the missiles, and I was told that the attacks were imminent, and I in interviews said that they're going to happen
You
tonight.
told me. I remember. I remember. Yeah.
And then um, Trump accepted Iran's terms, and he backed down, and the MOU was signed. And not only that, but Trump said that he will lift the siege immediately instead of waiting for a month. So well, they take Iran's threat seriously. Ultimately, Iran will force the Israeli regime to leave Lebanon. That will happen. And whether it's through keeping the Strait of Hormuz closed or whether it's through striking missiles at the Israeli regime or striking missiles or firing missiles at the Israeli forces in Lebanon, that's a different matter. But as I said to you, and you can be very confident about this, Iran will not have an agreement with the United States over the Strait of Hormuz, over the war, until the genocide is stopped and Lebanon is no longer occupied. And of course, Iran's stolen assets are returned and so on.
Mm. All right, so next thing, Professor, is question I always like to ask you is with the information that we have now, and I know it changes by the week and by the day, how likely do you think we are to see full blown war like we did in March? Because there's a lot of reasons not to. The American munitions are depleted, the American bases are destroyed, the Gulf is economically hurt. Qatar, I was going through the report today that Qatar's economy is expected to contract by over 8% this year. Kuwait, Bahrain, probably worse. Um, and then on the Iranian side, the economy's hit hard. A lot of the leaders have been assassinated. The a lot of the energy infrastructure, not they didn't strike a lot of the energy infrastructure, but a lot of the military infrastructure was struck. So both sides would obviously prefer to avoid war. And both sides are licking their wounds after this war. How likely are they to get back to that situation, though?
I think there's a significant possibility for renewed conflict. And I think that it would be, while Iran does not want war, but the advantage would be to Iran because Iran, uh, I don't know if you've seen the footage that came out today from Iran, but the commander of the Iranian armed forces and the acting minister of defense, they visited one of the factories, one of the underground factories that produces missiles. And the point is that the Israelis and the Americans have not only failed in destroying Iran's missile cities, they failed to destroy Iran's missile developing capabilities, its R&D capabilities, and the production of missiles and drones as well. So Iran can produce missiles and is producing missiles and drones at a very rapid pace, and it's expanding its underground missile cities. After all, it's our home turf. It's being done in its own country. While the United States is going to have a difficult time in building new missiles and interceptors and all the other things that they need, and the situation with the U.S. Navy and all that is obvious for everyone. So while the situation is not ideal for Iran, the economy is definitely hurting. But militarily speaking, time is on the side of the Iranians, and they know that. And so, if the United States wants to carry out their so-called D-Day for economic warfare, well, the Iranian response uh, may involve using its military capability.
Yeah. The last thing I want to ask you about is the Mecca agreement. Is there talks in Iran on national TV about Iran potentially joining the defense agreement with Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi? I know it's too early for
No,
that,
no,
but is that at least being discussed?
no, 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 because this agreement, first of all, the three countries have three different agendas. Uh, s- Second of all, this agreement was not signed to support the Palestinians. I mean, we've had 3 years of genocide. It wasn't signed to support the people of Yemen when the Americans were waging war against Yemen. In fact, the Saudis assisted the United States in that war. Uh, the Saudis gave them their airspace, and the Americans used their airspace to bomb Yemen last year. Um, they didn't do it to protect southern Lebanon. This was a deal that was struck. The Saudis had one objective. I think we know it has more to do with contemporary current circumstances in Yemen and Iraq, but I don't think Pakistan or Turkey are going to sacrifice their citizens for the Saudi war against Yemen. And the Turks have their own agenda, and I don't think that the Saudis are going to help them in that regard either. And Pakistan has its own objectives. They have differing objectives. For Iran, it's very clear. I mean, Iran's objective in the region is to expel the United States and to support the Palestinian cause, and that's what the axis of resistance is about. If any country wants to coordinate with Iran to marginalize the Israeli regime, Iran will work with them. Iran tried to convince countries in the region to break off ties with the Israeli regime early on in the genocide at at the Islamic conference in Riyadh when President Raisi, the late President Raisi, went there. Iran asked countries, I don't want to name those countries, but it asked countries to break off ties and economic relations with Israel. Um, one of them, which has a closer relationship to Iran, said if the others do it, we'll do it. But there was no consensus, so no one did it. So none of these countries have, you know, have broken ties with the Israeli regime. Those that do have ties, those none of them who have economic ties have broken off those ties. But if they move in that direction, Iran will assist them. Iran will assist Turkey if the Israelis attack them. I think that there's no doubt about that. Iran will do more than I think people would expect. And even Syria, even though it's an Al Qaeda regime, it's a proxy regime, it's affiliated to the United States. But if it, for whatever reason, was sincerely determined to defend the territory of Syria and to take back territory, because huge amounts of critical territories have been taken by the Israeli regime over the last couple of years. If they're determined to do so, there's no doubt that Iran will assist. Iran would assist them more than Mr. Erdogan ever, if that was to
Ah,
happen.
the region is looking like a mess, Professor, especially after that Israeli strike on Syria. This war really turned the entire region upside down in a very negative way. It could obviously take a completely different turn, a more positive one, such as Islamic countries coming together. I think that's one positive development, and the region taking care of its own security. Um, but overall, if you look at what's happening in Yemen, the power struggle, the power vacuum, Syria, Lebanon, um, it's worrying. Iraq. There's one of the actually, as we wrap up,
Well,
there's just one thing. There's one of the militia, Shafak. According to Shafak News, there's a group Asaib al Haq apparently handed over
yes.
weaponry in one of its bases to the Iraqi government, and they're a very close military group to Iran, which is an interesting development in Iraq.
Well, the resistance in Iraq is very large, and they're in different areas, and that resistance will continue to exist. And there may be many deals here and there. The Iraqi government has its problems with the United States because the United States has Iraq by the throat. The United States, Iraqi oil goes to an American bank, and then the United States decides when to give Iraq its oil. And so the Iraqi government has a balancing act to carry out. But we all know who won the elections. The Friends of Iran won by a huge margin. And so Iraq and Iran are closely coordinated, and the two countries uh, want the United States to leave. But Iran also understands that the Americans are ruthless, as they are everywhere. They are ruthless to the Iraqi people. So Iraq sells oil to China, let's say. That oil goes to a US bank, and then the United States, and then the Iraqi government does not have access to that bank account. The United States government has to give permission from it. And so, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if they've given the salaries of the government employees, but for 2 months, the Iraqis, until last week, I was told that they haven't, government employees in Iraq haven't been paid for 2 months. Why? Because the Americans won't give them the money. So that is the situation in Iraq. So it's complicated. But in any case, I mean, the bigger picture, Mario, the bigger picture is that the Israeli regime is carrying out genocide. And the United States is assisting the Israeli regime in carrying out genocide. And the only country and its allies that are opposed to genocide. I mean, opposed to genocide, not just saying, oh, it's a bad thing, it's terrible. Netanyahu is a bad guy. No, seriously working against this genocidal entity is Iran. And so the war started. Did any country come to the assistance of Iran or Yemen, which also stood up for Palestine? That's why the Americans waged war against Yemen. Did any country in this region try to join, create a pact with which included Iran or Yemen because of Israel? No, none of them did that. They all maintain excellent relations with the United States. They all maintain excellent relations with empire. But the reason why we have this war is because Iran says no to genocide. Yemen says no to genocide. The resistance says no to genocide. It's very clear. Now, if for whatever reason Erdogan is forced into war with Turkey, with the Israeli regime, because this regime is a regime of genocidal madmen, without a doubt, Iran will go to the assistance of Turkey in a big way. No doubt about it. So if any country in this region decides that no, we don't want to be under the boot of the United States, and we are going to defend ourselves against the Israeli regime, Iran will assist, and so will Iran's allies. It's not that complicated. But as long as countries are going to assist the United States in waging war, provide them with bases, then those countries are not going to be safe in this region anymore. As long as the United States wages war against Iran, there's not going to be peace and stability in the region. The Americans can't have that anymore, and Iran will not allow it to happen. So the Iranian conditions are very, very clear. The wars in the region have to come to an end, and then the Strait of Hormuz is open. It's not that difficult. What is
It's pretty big.
difficult is that the United States is not a sovereign country. The United States is not an independent country. Decisions are not made by the American people. The decisions are made by the Zionist lobby, the Israeli regime, and we're seeing the results unfold across the region.